יהודים, מסכות רעשנים, שיר וריקודים. אבל הרישה רש רשש, אבל הרישה רש רשש, אבל הרישה רש רשש, ברעשנים, ברעשנים. חתורים, חתורים, זה שולחים מנות, מחמדים, מבדקים, נגדנות. אבל הרישה רש רשש, אבל הרישה רש רשש, אבל הרישה רש רשש, ברעשנים, ברעשנים.
אני פורים שמח ובדח, הלא רק פעם בשנה אבוא להתארח. לה 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 לה. עידת פורים הכו תוך צלתיים, הומי ייתנו בפורים לחודש לחודשיים. לה לה לה
ליצן קטן נחמד, רוקד עם כל אחד, ליצן קטן שלי, אולי תרקוד איתי, אולי, אולי, אולי תרקוד איתי, אולי, אולי, אולי תרקוד איתי.
ליצן קטן נחמד, רוקד עם כל אחד, ליצן קטן אני, אולי תרקוד איתי, אולי, אולי, אולי תרקוד איתי, אולי, נו אולי, אולי תרקוד איתי.
זקן יורד ליד ברכיים, שפם ארוך לי המתיים. היש צועלת ושמחה כמוני מסכה, היש צועלת ושמחה כמוני מסכה.
קרניים לי קרני התיש, שיניים לי שיני התיש.
היש צועלת ושמחה כמוני מסכה, היש צועלת ושמחה כמוני מסכה. מלפני צמא עם סרט, מאחורי זנב תפארת. היש צועלת ושמחה כמוני מסכה, היש צועלת ושמחה כמוני מסכה. היש צועלת ושמחה כמוני מסכה, היש צועלת ושמחה כמוני מסכה. שושנת יעקב צהלה ושמחה, בראותם יחד חלק מרדכי. שושנת יעקב צהלה ושמחה, בראותם יחד חלק מרדכי. תשועתם הייתה לנצח, תקוותם בכל דומתו. ברוך מרדכי היהודי, ברוך מרדכי היהודי. שושנת יעקב צהלה ושמחה, בראותם יחד חלק מרדכי. שושנת יעקב צהלה ושמחה, בראותם יחד חלק מרדכי. תשועתם הייתה לנצח, תקוותם בכל דומתו. ברוך מרדכי היהודי, ברוך מרדכי היהודי. ומרדכי יצא מלפני המלך, בלבוש מלכות ועטרת זהב. ומרדכי יצא מלפני המלך, והעיר שושן צהלה ושמחה. ליהודים ושמחה וששון ויקר, ומרדכי יצא מלפני המלך בלבוש מלכות ועטרת זהב, ומרדכי יצא מלפני המלך והעיר שושן צהלה ושמחה. ליהודים הייתה אורה ושמחה, אורה ושמחה וששון ויקר. ליהודים הייתה אורה ושמחה, אורה ושמחה וששון ויקר. חג פורים, חג גדול ליהודים, מסכות רעשנים, שיר וריקודים. אבל הרישה רש רש רש, אבל הרישה רש רש רש, אבל הרישה רש רש רש, ברעשנים, ברעשנים. חג פורים, זה שולחים מנות, מחמדים, ממתקים, נגד מגדנות.
Okay, so welcome everybody to Torah Talk with Hannah. As you can see, I'm at home this weekend and I'm in my library workspace. So welcome to my teaching corner. Our parsha this evening is Vayikra, and it translates to "and he called." And as you may notice in that last song that we had up there, some of those alternating lines ended with the word Vayikra, and he called. So I thought that was a perfectly appropriate choice. I have a video for this week, Parsha in 60 seconds, and let me pull that up for you. You will find this. Let's see, there it is.
Shalom and welcome to Parsha in 60 seconds. We have now exited the Exodus and have entered Leviticus. Today's portion is from Leviticus 1:1 through 5:26. It is called Vayikra, which means "and he called." God gave the laws of sacrifices. Burnt offerings could be a bull, rams, a male goat, or turtle doves, or pigeons, which the priest burnt completely on the altar. Meal offerings were made of flour and oil, from which priests would break a piece off and burn it on the altar. And the remainder was the priest's lunch. When consumed, no leaven or honey was used, just salt. Strict and very specific protocols were given for meal, well-being, and sin offerings, which included the burning of various internal organs of animals. Offerings for just about everything you could think of, including but not limited to persons who were a silent witness, touched an unclean thing, touched human uncleanliness, uttered an oath and forgot. The person had to confess and sacrifice a female sheep or goat. If they could not afford a sheep, 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons. And if they couldn't afford that, a handful of flour. Basically, sacrifice was required for every possible scenario. And that is Vayikra in 60 seconds. Shalom and welcome to Parsha in 60 seconds. We have now exited the Exodus and have...
Wow, okay. Has everybody got a clear picture now? You should be back. So you got the brief overview, and as you can tell, this parsha is about God telling Moses and speak to the people of Israel and say to them, and this time he's to tell them about the sacrifice. Great, Troy. I'm really glad to hear that. Everybody else okay with sound and picture? You should be able to clearly see all the piles of books behind me. Things are looking good. Okay. So I wanted to talk about there's a variety of sacrifices that are discussed in this particular section. The first one up is called the Olah, and it's spelled the Olah sacrifice. And this one is also known as the burnt offering. So Olah, what goes up, is the smell, and the burnt offering. But as we all know, when something goes up, something has to come back down because it just doesn't go up and never come back in some form or another. So when we make the burnt sacrifice and send it up to God, what are some ideas that you think might come back to us? If we send water up, it comes back as water. If we send balloons up, they get carried for a while till they run out of oxygen and helium or air, whatever you put inside that particular balloon, and then they come back down again. But what do you think might come back down to earth from the Olah sacrifice that goes up to God? I'll wait a few minutes and see if we have any suggestions on what you might think that is. Oh, wow, okay. So what do you think? What do you think we might get back from an Olah sacrifice? When volcanoes spew things out and they spew lava and ashes and smoke and all the stuff that goes with that, we get back ash. So what do you think we might be getting back from the Olah? Okay. So no suggestions this evening? Troy? Jed Jones? Okay. Any guests? If you'd like to participate in the conversation, please feel free to sign in. You can sign in as a guest if you'd like, or you can create an account. Just type your name into the chat box and you'll be directed to where you can log in. We get back the blessing of God. We send the sacrifice up because the word for sacrifice in Hebrew is korvah, and it's kuf, vav, resh, vet, and it means to draw close, to be closer to bring something closer is to korvah. So a sacrifice is called a korban because it will draw us closer to God. So when we send up the burnt offering, God comes back to us and with blessings. Now we have to remember that the time period that we're talking about tonight is the biblical period, and at this time in history, it was let's see, what am I thinking? Biblical sacrifice was common during this time period, and they would look askance at us going to shul and saying prayer, much as we would, as we sort of look at sacrifice and go, ooh, that's kind of, ooh, yuck. So, we have to think about our time frame here. We talk about the burnt offerings, and the smoke goes up and God's blessing comes down, and they have different animals that can be used for the sacrifice. You can use a goat, a sheep, cattle. If you can't afford cattle because they were expensive, then you can move down the list and use sheep and goats. And if you can't afford them, then the Torah offers you an additional option of pigeons or young pigeons or doves, and they're both probably pretty close to the same size. And if you still can't afford that, then they offer the vegetarian option of flour. Now, sometimes you bring just a meat offering, and sometimes, depending upon what the sacrifice is for, you'll just simply bring a meal offering. And some of these pages are pretty graphic. If you look at chapter 1, verse 15 through 17, you read about how the priest brings the bird to the altar, pinches off of its head, and turns it into smoke while its blood is drained out against the side of the altar. And then the priest will remove its crop with its contents, cast it into the place of the ashes on the east side of the altar, then tear it open by its wings without severing it, and turn it into fine smoke on the altar upon the wood that's on a fire. And then it becomes a burnt offering by fire, a pleasing odor to the Lord. Why would God care whether or not the odor was pleasing? Yeah, it is expensive to still have cattle. Yeah, it's expensive to buy the cows. It's expensive to feed and maintain the cows. It's expensive to butcher the cows. Right. So why? But in verse 17, when we talk about a burnt offering, if you've ever smelled burnt meat on the grill, roasting meat on the grill, grilled meat smells really good, but it hits that burnt point and consumed to ash, and it doesn't smell so good. But according to the Torah, it's a pleasing odor to God. Why would God find this pleasing? Why would we care if God finds it pleasing? More importantly, how do we know that God finds it pleasing? Maybe he thinks it stinks. Is it really the odor that's pleasing to God, or something else? Those particular few verses beg more questions than they actually answer. Now, when we move on into chapter 2, they begin to talk about meal offerings, meal to the Lord. And of course, bring your choicest flour. So, with the cat, just as we did with the cattle, just as we do with the sheep, just as we do with the goats and the pigeons and the doves, we want to bring the best that we can afford to bring. So bring your choicest flour, your best of it, and pour oil onto it on the altar. Cover it with frankincense and present it to Aaron's son, the priests, and the priest will scoop out a handful of this in oil and frankincense and immediately turn it into smoke on the altar. So it too becomes a pleasing odor to God. And once again, we wonder, well, why does God care if it's a pleasant odor? Do we know? How do we know that God thinks it's a pleasant odor? We don't. We are not told that information. So those are kind of like insertions, I would call them, into the text that give us the information that's really not there. I believe that the people who wrote that particular line, the pleasing odor to the Lord line, have determined that for themselves, that they believe that God found it a pleasing odor. And I think that it's not the odor that God found pleasing. I think it's something more. I think it's the idea of the sacrifice itself. The fact that we took the time to come to the temple, or the Mishkan, wherever we're at. Right now, we're probably at the Mishkan in the wilderness because we just finished Exodus and they haven't built the temple in Jerusalem. But once the temple is built and the sacrifices are moved from the Mishkan to the temple, then it will still continue the same way. And I believe that it's not so much the odor that God finds pleasing, it's the fact that we take the time to show that we care about our relationship, that we are invested in our relationship with God, because this helps bring us closer to God, and we want to be closer to God, and we want to be invested in a relationship. And so at this time of period, we would offer sacrifices. Any comments? And we would, of course, invite the priest to the great sacrificial barbecue because not everything was turned into a burnt offering. Some of it goes on the altar and becomes a burnt offering, and some of it does not. Some of it is used for feeding the priests. They would roast some of it and keep it there. It was slaughtered in the Mishkan, and it was used there. And when we get to chapter 3 of this Parsha reading, then they start talking about the process of the slaughtering, about bringing the sheep before the Lord, laying their hand upon the head of the offering, and it's slaughtered before the tent of meeting, and Aaron's sons get to dash the blood against all sides of the altar. And then you present as an offering by fire to God the fat from the sacrifice of well-being, the whole broad tail, which is removed close to the backbone, the fat that covers the entrails and all the fat that's about them, the kidneys and fat, the protuberance on the liver is removed with the kidneys and the fat, and they all turned in. So one way that we could look at this today is, one creative interpretation would be to have a fat-free diet, to make sure that we eat correct fats and not the wrong fats, because we have to have fat in our systems in order for our bodies to work, but we have to eat correct fats. Some fats will make us gain weight, but some fats, like olive oil, nuts, avocados, they will help us lose weight and maintain if we don't need to lose weight. But if we're eating butter and we're eating the fat, like to talk about the fat of calf, then we're kind of out on a limb eating things that we shouldn't be eating. But what is so bad about that particular fat? Any ideas? Besides the fact that it's high probably in saturated fat and it's high in cholesterol. But they didn't know that then. The fat around the kidneys and the entrails, like the fat around the liver, especially around the kidneys, the heart, that is the choicest fat of the animal. I don't know how many of you come from an English background where people in England, where you might have grown up eating suet pudding, but the suet is the choicest part of the fat. And you go to the butcher and you tell them when you want suet that you have to specify where you want it to come from because of the fact that it is the choicest piece. And you want the stuff that lightly flakes and can be like shaved off with a potato peeler or something. And it's around the kidneys. And that's what people in England use in their puddings. So if you're going to England and you're eating pies and puddings, chances are, if it's not a vegetarian restaurant, it's probably being made with suet. However, on the good side of the note, it keeps you warm at night. It keeps you warm in cold weather. Wow, Troy, you and I are the only ones left. It's a conversation for two. Did you bring your coffee cup? After all, we're going to talk about food tonight and barbecues, because in essence, sacrificial offerings could be looked at as barbecues. You get a new neighbor in a neighborhood, throw a barbecue and invite the new neighbors, feed them handsomely. We get a new god, our gods now in the neighborhood. So we're going to have a community barbecue and invite the community. And parts of the sacrifices and offerings we'll eat, and we'll eat them together as a group. And parts of them will go up in smoke to God, and what comes back are blessings from God, because everything that goes up, what goes up must come down. Laws of gravity. Sounds good. Yeah, sounds good to me too. It was a beautiful day on the beach today, and I was thinking, looks like a day for a barbecue. Get out the grill, get out the chicken. My kids don't want to have anything to do with pigeons. They think that's totally unacceptable behavior to eat pigeons. And so, there we are. We move on to chapter 4 of Vayikra, and here we have sin offerings. The chatat korbanim, the sins. And let's see. Sacrifice prescribed in this chapter is called chatat. More precisely, it's a offering of purgation. And chatat, to purge yourself of your poor behavior, to sin, to gain forgiveness. The verb chata means primarily to miss the mark. So the sinner is one who misses the correct objective. And in Scripture, it usually means to commit sin or crime. Let's see, Troy, you say, let's say we wanted to eat meat. Would we have to go to the Mishkan and take the priest to kill? And we would get some of the meat and the rest went to God or the priest to eat. The Torah is not clear on that specifically. It doesn't say what we want, what the instructions are for us to eat meat in our place, in our particular home. We're not told that. But if you think about those days and you think about what they had and they didn't have refrigeration, they could turn cattle, beef into jerky. You can lay it out in the sun, but that takes time to do that. Quite frankly, they probably wouldn't have cooked beef except as a temple sacrifice. That's my theory, because it would have been expensive and it would be huge. That's a lot of meat to try and preserve or to put up. They probably didn't have the quantity of salt to pack it in barrels and to salt it and eat salt beef. And so they probably ate beef only there at the temple. Sheep, on the other hand, goats, they could probably kill one and eat one with a family group without going to the Mishkan first, because it wasn't just about a sacrifice. If they were killing it for a meal, then they would just kill it. Right, we don't go out and hunt because in order to eat the meat we hunt, we have to slaughter it by kashrut. So we have to kill the animal in the most humane. Now we could go out and go trapping, but not like bear traps because that brings pain to an animal kind of thing. Try and catch a box, put it in there and see if you can catch it with a trapping cage or something like that. But most Jews don't go out and hunt. And no, they probably didn't eat very much meat. And when they did eat meat, most likely they ate the pigeons or the doves because they were easier to catch, and they probably ate their sheep and their goats. Some people eat camel, but I don't think the Israelites ate their camels. Because my son's had roast camel in Iraq, and he said it tastes like bear, but since he's never had bear, I don't know where he thinks that came from, except somebody must have said that to him. But anyway, they probably ate more yogurt, more grains, more dried beans, peas, lentils, those kind of things. They would do a sheep or a goat for Passover, and they may have just eaten meat on holidays, like the 3 pilgrimage holidays, when they would come to the Mishkan, make the pilgrimage into the city. Yeah, right. And we see that in the Torah because when the 3 strangers come to visit Abraham, and after his circumcision, he tells Sarah to go. And he goes and gets a small calf, and he butchers that so he can serve meat to his guests. Because a lot of people say, well, he served meat and milk at the same meal, but he's exempt from that because it was before the commandments were given in the mitzvot. But some people say, well, he observed them anyway, and that's why he served the dairy before, because you can serve dairy an hour before you eat meat, and then wait an hour, and if he had butchered the calf, well, then it would probably take longer for that to get cleaned up and skinned and, everything you do in the process of butchering. And so they ate the cheese as like an appetizer course, and then eventually they got to the meat. So, yeah, I don't think they ate a whole lot of meat in that period of time. And they had it available because they had it that they brought from Egypt, and so they were raising it. Now, with the guilt offering, the chatat sin offering, we talk about dipping again, bringing the bull. This one you want to bring a bull for, and slaughtering the bull before God, and then the anointed priest takes some of the bull's blood, brings it into the tent of meeting, dips his finger into the blood, and sprinkles it 7 times before the Lord in front of the curtain of the shrine. And then they put some blood on the horns of the altar of aromatic incense in the tent of meeting, and the rest of the bull's blood he pours out at the base of the altar for the burnt offering, which is over at the entrance of the tent. Then he takes all the fat from the bull, and this is all the choicest of the fats, like the suet that you would want for your puddings and stuff. He takes the kidneys and their fat and the liver and turns them into smoke on the altar. But the hide and all its flesh, as well as its head and legs, all the rest of the bull, he carries to a clean place and burns it up with wood and burned it on the ash heap. Okay, let's see. Some of the medical information you've read says our bodies really weren't designed to eat meat. That's possible. It's very possible. I have not done a lot of research on that. I know that we started out as vegetarians in the Torah, and then, of course, people were getting out of hand, and that's where one of the Noahide laws came in, and also one of the 613 mitzvot is not to rip the limb off of a living animal, because some people would go apparently out into the field, rip off one of the legs from their animal, and just leave the animal out there in the field to either die or to heal as best as it could and hobble along on three legs. So that is one of the mitzvot that is forbidden to us. We are not allowed to go rip limbs off of animals and eat them, nor are we allowed to eat roadkill, because the meat we eat is supposed to be slaughtered according to kashrut, according to the kosher standards, which is why we also don't go hunting. Because when we kill the animal hunting, it's not, when you shoot it, that's obviously not kashrut. So, I don't know. But then you have to define meat. Are you going to declare poultry in the category with meat, Troy? Like the rabbis in, I believe, the early 19th century did, because we eat poultry very similar to the way we eat meat. And then the question of fish. Are we designed to eat fish? So food stuff is really a huge question. And it has not really gone away. Some sort of sushi is still alive. Yeah, I'm not a sushi person. I don't care to eat sushi. In fact, there are people today who will not eat kosher meat because they believe that for something to be declared kosher, it also has to be considered eco-kosher, so that the animal is raised in a decent way and it's not living like on an animal farm, like in a feedlot for cattle and sheep, or like the big chicken farms where the chickens don't roam the neighborhood. They live in little cages all their lives and then they're butchered there. And there have been instances in the news of kosher butchers, the big factories that have been out of control and not following the laws of kashrut, and they've been in trouble with the law. And so people say, yeah, that's because red meat is heavier than chicken and fish. Those are both lighter options. And red meat has all that heavy saturated fat that's really not good for us. And even though we're told not to eat all this fat in this particular section of the Torah, we really can't eat meat without fat, because meat is so marbled with fat, you just can't get every bit of it out. Yeah, red meat once a week would be good. Eat more chicken, eat fish, do some vegetarian options, perhaps like tofu or dried beans. Those are good options too. And eat a varied diet. Now, I don't know that they had a lot of fish where our ancestors were wandering in the wilderness. I don't know if fishing was something that they would have done at that time. They fished when they lived in Egypt because they had the Nile River. There aren't a lot of rivers where our ancestors were wandering, and so I'm not sure if they were doing fishing there. Once they got into the land of Canaan, then there would have been more options to eat fish and so on. Yeah, I had my red meat at lunch today. I've had mine for the week. Let's see. Think about this idea of dipping your hand. Every time they're doing these sacrifices, they're dipping their hands in the blood, and they're like flicking it at the altar. Can you imagine that? What that must have looked like, what that must have smelled like in the Mishkan? By the Mishkan, the flies that were buzzing, it's kind of like a butcher shop out there. And sin offerings, because when they set the Mishkan up, they set altars in different places so that they would have like sin offerings at one place. They would have the, let's see, where am I at? Removing all the fat for the sin offering. If the offerings he brings is a sheep, then he must bring a female sheep. and that's rare. Usually, the animals that are brought for offering are male animals. But in this case, in chapter 4, both in verse 28 and 32, if the sin of which he is guilty is brought to his knowledge, somebody has pointed it out to him, then he brings the female goat without blemish. And if he's bringing a sheep, then he brings a female sheep without blemish. So somebody would have had to point the sin out to him to say, hey, I saw you do that, and that's not right. So maybe perhaps in a way they had like a big brother thing going on. They were watching and seeing who was sinning, whose boots are on under somebody else's bed, sort of thing. We don't know. And let's see. Now, if it's the chieftain who incurs guilt by unwittingly, without knowing about it, accidentally does any of the things by the commandment of the Lord said don't do, and he finds himself guilty, and that is brought to his knowledge, then he brings a male goat without a blemish. But if it's from the populace, people at large, then he brings the female goat. So we see some distinction here too about which animals are acceptable. So this particular section is like our instruction manual for the priests. Okay. Oh yeah, he unwittingly did a sin. Let's flip through the pages. I think I saw that on 222. What to do in case of. Oh, no, that was a deliberate thing. Turn back, page 135. Now we can talk about what that was and say, okay, if his offering is a goat, we're to bring it before God. So this is really a reading of rules. It reads like a cookbook. Excuse me a second, Troy. Let me shut this thing off. Hold on one moment. Let me get rid of this child. Yes, Aaron. Yes. Can I call you back? I'm in class till 9 o'clock. No, it's 8:40 and I'm here for another 20 minutes. I'll call you back then. Bye. Okay, excuse me. Animals that they brought to the Mishkan had special food and treatment from the other animals. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they would have had special treatment as opposed to the other animals in the herd. I think that the owner would have gone to the herd and picked the best one that he had. And he would have examined it very carefully, made sure there were no blemishes, made sure that it was perfect in every way before he took it down to the Mishkan. But we have different rules for the chieftains than we have for the general populace. And let's see here. We talk about a sacrifice of well-being, of shalom. This is the shalamim, zavak shalamim, the sacrifice of well-being, completeness, and a sense of peace and wholeness and happiness and health. And that on any sacrifice always belongs to God because, again, it is the choicest part. And let's see, there's going to be one more. The guilt offering. We talk about chatat, sin offering, and asham, guilt. And you may recognize the word asham. You may be familiar with this word from the Yom Kippur liturgy in its form ashamnu, which means we are guilty of. Ashamnu. That prefix nu is we. They don't have separate words for personal pronouns. They are prefixes that are, no, suffixes that are attached to, obviously, the ends of words because that's where suffixes go. And so ashamnu means we are guilty of. And if we are guilty of something, then we have a different list of things to bring. If we heard a public imprecation and we're able to testify to that, and we don't, then we are subject to punishment. If we touch something that's unclean, whether it's the carcass of an unclean beast, unclean cattle, unclean creeping thing, and the fact has escaped him, and being unclean, or anything that's human uncleanliness, like one changes a baby's diaper, for instance, or when you utter oaths to bad or good purpose, when you realize that you have sinned in any of these, then you must confess your sin. And this could be where the Catholic Church got the confession, the idea of confession from, that they have the confessional and you go down to the priest and you confess your sins. So we confess, and then, but it doesn't say that we confess to the priest, it just says we confess. And then we bring a penalty to God for that particular sin. And it has to be a female from the flock. It can be either a sheep or a goat, and the priest will make expiation for them on behalf of their sin. And this is where it gets into, if you can't afford the sheep, then bring 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one which will be for the sin offering and the other for the burnt offering. And then, of course, we get these instructions of how he's going to do the bird again, pinch its head off, and so on. But if you cannot suffice, you don't have the means for the 2 turtle doves or the 2 pigeons, bring a tenth of an ephah of choice flour for a sin ordering. Do not add any oil. Do not lay frankincense on it because it's a sin offering. Bring it to the priest. The priest will scoop some out and turn it into smoke, and there will be the sin offering. And then the remainder belongs to the priest, and he can have it for lunch. He can have it for dinner, for breakfast, whatever it is. So we've got options here. And we talk about a mincha. Let's see, let's go back to chapter 2 and talk. And the olah is the burnt offering. And in chapter 2, it's called the mincha. And the mincha is the meal offering. But the word mincha is very, very interesting. In English, it's spelled like this, just like it sounds. Mincha. And in Genesis 32:14, it's translated as gift. And in 1 Kings 5:1, it's translated as tribute to. And in Genesis chapter 4, verse 3, it's used for the word sacrifice in general. But in the book of Leviticus, the meaning of mincha is strictly an offering prepared from grain. Now, post-biblical, mincha came to mean afternoon prayer, and in general, it came to mean afternoon. So if you're going to mincha, you're going to the afternoon prayer, and many communities do mincha just immediately before they do ma'ariv. They'll go sometimes from one right to the other, and they schedule them both to make it convenient for people to come to both mincha and ma'ariv because of life in our modern society. Right. Mincha can be gift. Oh, I thought I wrote that in there. Yeah. Gift, tribute, in general. And gift is, let's see, Genesis 32:14. If you're looking for tribute, you'll find it in 1 Kings 5:1. And as sacrifice in general is in Genesis 4-3, but in Leviticus, it is a specific offering of grain. Post-biblical, it's afternoon prayer. Modern, it's both afternoon prayer and afternoon in general. So mincha is one of those words that has changed its meaning over time. So when you're looking at it and you're reading about it in the Torah, you have to think about the time context when you go to translate it. Is it being translated as, the grain offering? Could the gift in Genesis 32:14 and the tribute in 1 Kings 5:1, but I haven't looked them up to see what the specific gift was that they brought, but maybe they were gifts and tributes of grain. And yeah, mincha became afternoon prayer post-biblically. And in a Sephardic service, they do offering lessons. Okay, so they read about the offerings at the beginning of mincha. That's pretty cool. I have not been to a Sephardic prayer service. I've only been to Ashkenazi. Mainstream American. So we got our mincha, we got our olah, we got the next one is Zavat Shelamim, which is the sacrifice of well-being. And then we have Chatat. So we have Olah offering, which is burnt. We have, if I could spell better, Minha offering, which is grain. We have, I'll spell that. Zavat Shelamim, which is the sacrifice of well-being. We have Chatat, which is sin. And Asham, which is guilt. So those 5 sins are covered completely in this Parsha reading. And these are the main ones. Now, it's 10:02, so I have to remind you, Troy, that the donate button is up at the top of the page so that you could put your half shekel, drop it in there. For the purposes of punktorah, they consider a half shekel to be equivalent to about $5. And so if you have it, we would love to have you donate it because, as you know, we run on donations and grants because punktorah OneShul is a nonprofit. So anything you can do to help out would be fabulous, particularly since we are coming into Purim, and at Purim, one of the obligation mitzvot is to give shekels. We give tzedakah. So please feel free to use OneShul as your location of shekalim and donations this year for Purim. That's my study for this evening. Are there any other questions that you have or that you would like to talk about? Comments? Shall I play the Purim songs again? I should have worn one of my Purim hats today, huh? Maybe I will next week. Because it's a whole month of joy, so maybe I'll just wear one of my funky hats next week. Okay, no questions or comments, huh? How about let's see. What other comment can I find it here? Okay, when we get to chapter 4, it says our previous 3 chapters, which were Ola, Mincha, and Zabak, Shalamim, were obligatory on those who had incurred some kind of guilt. And they were chiefly to expiate unintentional sins. Now, the law did not permit someone to do a deliberate wrong and then square it off with the sacrifice, because in Proverbs we learn sacrifice of the wicked is an abomination to God. Let's see. Rabbi Sandy says in the yeshiva lessons that originally it was to be prayer, not sacrifices. But God did it as other people did them, not just the other nations, but Abraham and Noah, for example. Yes, because that was the culture of the ancient Near East. That was the normative method of worshiping whatever God that your people had. But our God is different, because when other cultures brought sacrifices to their gods, they brought it because they believed their gods need to eat. We bring sacrifices to God, but our sacrifices are actually given to the priests. What we send to God goes up in smoke on the altar. So we're sending up the smoke and the scent of the sacrifice. But it was easier to allow people in the ancient Near East to continue worshiping in a familiar way with a sacrifice, but to put new rules and new boundaries about how sacrifices were to be done. Do it this way, bring it here. If it's for this, then you bring this. If it's for that, bring that. The priest will do this. They'll do the blood this way. The priest will put blood here and there. You'll butcher, your animal in this location. So there were rules and regulations. Boundaries and fences. A lot of this I would like to see, like go to the temple school in Jericho and see them do everything. Oh yeah, that would be cool. I could just imagine the sight and close my eyes and think about the way that they would have slaughtered the animal out front of the tent of meeting and taking the blood in and dashing it on the altar. I have this visual representation of it in my mind, and it's like I can see it and I can smell it, and it'd have been like a barbecue. because families would bring it and they would eat together. And so we used to do a lot of ceremonial atonement, as according to Plout, because I'm using the Plout commentary here, which is from the Reform movement, I think. I'm not sure, but I like this one because it has lots of commentary, lots of ideas. And Plout says that ceremonial atonement for unwitting violations of the law was a psychologically sound procedure because often people are deeply disturbed if they've hurt somebody by accident, ignorance, or oversight. And so sacrifice would also clean their conscience and clear their conscience. Besides just saying, I'm sorry, this would give them a physical method to do that. And it worked very well. And we actually have something more. Let's see, modern law too, we have the concept of contributory negligence with criminal negligence. Like, say you're in a car accident and you were speeding, you were racing the car, you were driving like 100 miles down the freeway when you had the accident, but the accident wasn't, but something went wrong in the car when you hit the 100-mile mark, and so it died. And yes, there was negligence on the part of the manufacturer of the car because that part broke, but you contributed to that negligence because you were driving the car in a manner that it shouldn't have been driven. And so we still see that in our world today, but we've gotten it transferred over into our legal system and not in the ancient system. I'll have to Google the Temple School in Jericho to check that out. Okay, so we've hit 9 o'clock and my time with you is up. I've enjoyed chatting with you and sharing this parsha with you. We didn't have a large group, just you and I. We started out with a couple others, but then they went away. And, often offerings is not exactly the most exciting parsha reading we have. It's more rules and regulations, and it can get dry. So I appreciate you sticking around, Troy. I've enjoyed the chat. You're welcome. And I will see you again next week for Torah Talk with Hannah. Something with Ustream going on here. What's going on over there? Okay. Nothing's going on over here, so I don't know. If it continues to be a problem, let Adi know. He's our geek guy, and he knows what to do, how to fix things, and so on like that. So, okay. Well, let Adi know. It could be the weather up there. I hear there's another winter storm coming across the country. Okay. Well, maybe our beloved rabbi knows what to do with it. So we'll see. But could be the weather with that storm coming across the country. So we'll see. Uh-huh. Good reason. Well, I'm going to sign out and let you go. I still have to get going this evening. I got some other things to do, so I want to end the broadcast and we'll go from there.